All right.
You're good.
Let's do this.
Test.
Synergy Practices Podcast. I'm your host, Sasha Hawatpal, with my co-host, Artin Safarian.
How's everybody?
We are joined today, and we're continuing our, let's start over.
That's good.
Yeah, you didn't have the music cut in, right?
No, we don't need the
No,
music.
no, no, no.
I wanna talk about practice acquisitions versus startups. Yeah. Synergy Practices Podcast, powered by Artin Inc. I'm your host, Sasha Hawatpal, here with my co-host once again, Artin Safarian. We are talking practice acquisitions versus startups, and today we are joined by Brian Frederick. Brian Frederick has over 30 years of experience in the dental industry. If it's dental or dental related, the guy's has had something to do with it in his 10 years career. Brian, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here today.
So we got some questions for you, Brian. We want to talk practice acquisitions. Where do we want to start? You want to start with acquisitions, or do you want to start with building?
Well, I mean, let's go, Brian. Like you said, you've seen it for 30 years. It's a hot topic now. It's probably always been. So a lot of people have asked us, in fact, as we were shooting this podcast right before it, I got a call saying, I'm ready to do something. Should I build? Should I purchase?
His laptop is doing something.
Come on, man. This is what's going on.
It's starting to do an update. It stopped everything to.
I'm glad you picked it up. That's okay.
No, I'm paying attention. That's why. So make sure things like that. Let me turn off updates. Let me see. We don't have to. Let's do the whole thing again. Who cares? It's easy. You don't mind doing the whole thing again, do you?
No.
Okay. Test again. Test. All right.
Test.
Test.
Okay, we're good. Yeah, it was like your computer's about to restart for an update, and I had to stop it before it turned off. All right, here we go. Synergy Practices Podcast, powered by Artin Inc. I'm your host, Sasha Hawatpal, joined by my co-host, Artin Safarian. We are talking practice acquisitions versus startup build-outs. And today we are joined by Brian Frederick. Brian's got over 30 years of experience in dental, and let's put it this way, if there's anything dental related that you can think of, the guy's probably had something to do with it in the past 30 years. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sasha. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So it's a very hot topic in the industry. I mean, as far as you know, the past 30 years, has it always been a hot topic, practice acquisitions versus starting your own practice?
It's really gotten to be a much more prevalent topic today, particularly with larger practices, as the cost of attending dental school has increased over the years, and the size of practices has grown. There was a gap where young dentists were not in a position to be able to acquire those practices outright. So if an owner had reached a point where he or she was ready to sell the practice, what were they to do? And the opportunities abound with the DSOs, just like they had in other sectors within medical and beyond medical. You take a series of small businesses that are family owned, and you can roll them up, create some economies of scale. There's no question that there's benefit to that type of an approach, but there's also a lot of smaller practices that might have 1,200 or 1,500 square feet and in a location for such a long time that aren't necessarily candidates along those lines. And today, maybe that should be a focus that we talk about as we discuss purchasing a practice versus starting a practice.
So it's a topic for me on a daily basis now. In fact, right before the podcast we were shooting, I got a call on a doctor saying, look, I'm ready to do something. I want to talk to you whenever you have time in regards to should I purchase or should I look for a startup, right? If I'm a doctor coming to you, how do you get that conversation even started? What do you recommend? I mean, it's a loaded question, so we're here to talk about it. How do you start that with them?
Well, it's a loaded question, and it's an interesting answer to a question like that, because good people who are trying to assist dentists, and there's many of them out there in our field, are going to try to help a dentist acquire a space that's going to take into account the future. All dentists who are signing a lease, for instance, are going to want to take a 10-year lease because there's some economies of scale with that as well, with their leasehold costs and the way that can be managed with some contribution from the landlord. We're talking about 10 years, it's probably gonna have at least 2 or 3 additional 5-year terms. So we're talking about the long haul. So even though the practice might not be ready for 2,500 square feet today, it needs to be ready for it for tomorrow. Now, this is where it gets interesting. As opposed to purchasing versus starting, when you purchase, particularly that smaller practice, you're going to be moving it to a larger location at a later date anyway.
Because of what, growth?
Well, because of growth, and because you can't necessarily be as productive as you might have been working in a facility that was developed 20 or 25 years ago. Things have changed too much. There's too much kind of retrofitting of technology and the rest that just doesn't work. How many offices have we done that with, where we've tried to stay within a certain budget to keep it the way it was, but you really need to move some walls, or you really need to do...
Sure, and I think people are right now, because of the topic and the questions, and people are looking for a flat, black and white, cookie cutter answer when they're asking that, right? Because most dentists want probably to go to the book and say, oh, it's better to be or
no, he's right. I'm laughing just because
funny
that's
as it
exactly what they
sounds,
want.
sometimes I'm getting those questions that way, right? Like, as in, are you saying it's not, right? And I think part of it is because you mentioned people that are trying to help dentists. Unfortunately, and fortunately, there's a lot of people trying to help dentists, but some people are either not, explaining it properly, or to them, they're making it look like it's black and white, right? So what would you say to that? Like, is it a black and white, it's better to purchase, or it's better to do a startup? Is it, for you, is it black and white?
The experiences that I've had with clients over the years who have done the following has been the single best thing that they've ever done in their careers. And that is someone who started the practice from scratch, built it out the way they wanted it to be, had all of the accoutrements that would allow them to practice in the manner in which they would like to practice, and then, this is the key, acquiring a practice and merging it in. Think about that for a minute. When you're buying a practice and you're merging it in, it's the way that large insurance companies have operated for years. Nobody's banking with the same company that they banked with 3 years ago, much less 5 years ago. Those names have changed 2 or 3 times. It's those practices that have acquired a practice and melded it in, left behind the existing fixed expenses that were there. Now, the practice value is the practice value, whether it's sold to someone who's merging it into their practice, or someone who's buying it outright and taking on all of the fixed and variable expenses that are associated with that practice. That practice value is what it is. If the purchaser acquires the practice and merges it into their existing facility that they have designed for the future to be able to accommodate both the natural growth and also this hyper growth that takes place as a result of the merge-in, what they take to their bottom line is substantially more than they would otherwise. Why that hasn't become the standard in dentistry for practices that are 1,500 square feet and less, I'll never know. Maybe there aren't enough practices that have properly accommodated for the growth, both natural and...
On that note, why can't you're saying start one up and then merge. First of all, let's define merge. What do you mean by merge?
What I mean by merge is that you're gonna bring that practice into your practice.
So you're basically buying the patients.
You're buying the patients, you're buying the goodwill. There may be certain of the equipment that you bring over, but you're buying the business and you're merging that business into your existing business.
So I start a practice, let's say in an area, in a city, in an area, and then I go 2 miles down, I purchase another practice and just bring their patients over, their goodwill, their equipment, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying that because of the natural growth.
No, the natural growth that's going to take place is the organic growth. This is the hyper growth that takes place as a result of bringing those patients over to you.
Sure.
Now,
so then the idea would be somebody that's looking to purchase a practice will ask you, why can't I purchase an existing practice and then 2 years down the line go purchase another one and bring those patients over? Why can't I merge the second time?
That facility that you're purchasing the first time is not necessarily going to be set up for the growth that's going to occur. That growth of that existing facility, the way that it was originally set up, was set up to accommodate the natural growth for that practice that may have been in that location for 20 or 25 or more years. So anything we buy, it's a stock, it's bonds, whatever investment we may make, we're buying the future. And a future that is filled with the promise of doing it right, for making sure that tomorrow we're set up properly to be able to handle the organic growth that's there, in addition to having space for a practice that's going to be transitioned. Keep in mind, the DSOs are generally not interested in the small practices. So unless someone comes and knocks on the door, takes a look at that practice, sees what's going to need to be changed just to make it look nicer, but doesn't necessarily take into account a more productive facility.
Well, DSOs look for instant growth, right?
Yes.
They're looking for a practice that's already doing, its thing.
And larger.
Of course, the larger it is, the higher their revenue, the EBITDA is higher, and that's what they're looking at, right? That's
In your experience, you were saying 1,500 square foot and lower would potentially be less attractive to a DSO?
Yeah, well, it's certainly going to depend on the profitability and the amount of dentistry that's done there. But as a general rule, it's that type of practice that was the common practice build going back 15 or 20 or 25 years. So as those practices become available, as dentists become more aware of wanting to sell their practice, they should be aware of the fact that one of the most attractive qualities that their practice has is that as a potential merge into someone else. One of the questions I get from people is, well, if it's more attractive, should I be able to get more money for the practice? And the answer to that is no. The practice value is what it is. What the buyer does with it to make it more valuable is up to the buyer.
Sure.
But more buyers should be conscious of, if they have the type of facility that was properly planned, to be able to acquire those practices and merge them in.
Sure. Art said something on a previous podcast long ago where he said, I feel like every day you learn something new. And today I'm realizing that smaller practices look to become merged, is what you're saying. Larger practices look to merge. So you're the mergee or the merger.
Right. That's a great point. The larger practices now have a venue that they can follow to be able to cash out the equity that they have. That there was a gap for a while, and that's where the DSOs have filled that gap. But there's still tons of small practices who are going to be acquired by dentists in the traditional fashion. Dr. A comes in, takes over for Dr. B, but he also takes on all of the design and the rest that was there for
So
Dr. A.
we're talking about personal doctors, privately owning practices. Let's put the DSOs aside for a second. So for you, Brian, sounds like you're saying if you were a dentist, knowing what you know, you would definitely start one up and then buy a practice, merge it, correct? But your initial first practice would be a startup.
And the reason for that today, different than what it was when I started in this field in 82, it was the dentist was reliant on certain people that he or she was talking to help them put the right pieces in place for a practice to be successful. And really it's about filling the vessel. How quickly can this practice get to a point where you're maximally productive? Today, there's so much good information available for young dentists to be able to podcasts like this one and other wonderful information out there. The Ask Dental Journal for one, and many different publications that are out there. Great information, great consultants, a lot of great minds. Pick and choose, put your best plan together on how you want to grow. That tool wasn't in existence for dentists.
Sure, but could it be that tool is also causing dentists to think, to think that they should purchase, because more and more dentists nowadays, there's a question mark on mine, because it's not black and white like you're putting it. Most people are saying maybe it's better to purchase my first practice versus start up, right? Now, I don't know if it's 50-50, if more people think it's better purchase or what, but it is a high number, and not only it's a high number, the question exists whether the person decides to do one or the other. He goes through the analysis, right? So why do you think that is? Why do you think that has grown to be at a level where it is today?
Because people are
The doubts.
people are generally cautious about what they want to do next. I mentioned it earlier about the cost of attending dental school being what it is. The opportunity to acquire a practice may seem like that's the safe place to land right now, and that's okay. But recognize that you're not going to be in that location necessarily for the long haul. You're still going to experience the expense of going into a larger location, and that's okay too. But know that you're not avoiding the cost of doing business well. You're still going to have a facility to accommodate your growth, and the sooner you get that out of the way, the less expensive it will actually be.
So in that case, let's go through the challenges of acquiring a practice. What is a dentist facing when I'm going to buy a practice? What are some issues I might consider or run into or look at?
One that I see, unfortunately, in the pecking order of what should be done, first and second and third as you go through it, is a good strong look at the lease of the existing practice. That's something that should be dealt with early. I don't see that happening as much as I'd like to, and that's really a question for the broker to get a better grip on that. Financing should be lined up first to be able to make sure that that's a fit. You certainly want to have a good understanding of the value of the practice in terms of its profitability, and keep in mind that the purchase and sale of dental practices is not a regulated profession like real estate or stock transactions. So you really want to be careful to make sure that you have good objective information about the value of the practice.
And if I'm buying a practice, am I concerned about the patients?
Well, the concern about the patients, and the staff for that matter, is whether they're going to stay. That's a big issue for sure. But one of the things I have found that in purchasing a practice is that the retention level tends to be over 100%. And when I say that, I don't mean the number of patients that stay. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. But the new dentistry that's being done, as opposed to stuff that was maybe not fully done, or the dentist previously might not have stayed up on the CE as much, or whatever it may be, the amount of dentistry tends to be over 100% of what was previously done. So that's the case whether it's a merge-in or whether it's a practice sale. And one of the saving graces that really allows a practice sale to be quote-unquote successful.
Can I add to your list? You did a great list where you talked about looked at the lease.
Oh, sure.
One of the things that I think I would add to that list, Art, is know your business plan.
Oh, absolutely.
I know there are even loans that don't even require you to make a business plan, but I think writing down and knowing your business plan is the very first step, because I've run into doctors who are like, I don't think I need a 6 operatory practice. Why are we here? Why are we looking at well, this is what's available. Was it in your business plan? Is it part of your growth plan? So that's one thing I would add to that is, one thing Art and I preach is, yes, you're a dentist and you have this amazing degree and you're out there helping people, but you're also an entrepreneur. You've got to run this business. You've got to HR, you have all that fun stuff you're going to deal with. So knowing your business plan from day one and sticking to your business plan, that's your skeleton. That's your path to your goal. So that's one thing I would add to your list. I didn't mean that.
Oh, no.
You're firing up some great ideas.
A big part of this is when people ask me, if you were to define a dental practice, it'd be very difficult to do. There's so many different types of practice today, so many different ways that people are being helped. If we were to ask a dentist today, what percentage of the dentistry that you're doing today, and I've asked this question many times, is the dentistry you learned in dental school? That number's like less than 10%, more times than not, when I'm asking dentists that question. So the evolution of what's been able to have been done in technology, technique, and materials over the last 30 years has been amazing. And today's dentists who are well trained in those areas and having access to great support and information should be more bullish about starting a practice than ever. But as you said, Sasha, you got to have your business plan. The full bore 6 days a week practice might not be for every dentist. If you want to have more of a boutique practice, all of that's possible. But it's really important to have your end in mind before you make a critical decision about this wonderful gift that you've given yourself in a dental degree.
So, I mean, you mentioned, retaining patients and staff
Yes.
is almost not negligible, right? It's very, very low, right, to not retain them. So do you think people associate that and say, look, if it's easier for me to retain versus to start up, find the right person, are people's mindset set the way to say, okay, I got someone, it's easier for me to retain versus go look and find from scratch?
Well, find from scratch doesn't mean people that have never worked in dentistry before. But,
Sure.
But there's something to be said for a team of individuals who truly meld as a team and grow together. And it's no knock on people who've been around for a long time. I'm one of those people that's been around for a long time and appreciate being appreciated. But it's, to build a young team, I'm going to use the analogy just because it recently ended. The Baltimore Orioles had an incredible season this year with all those young players who played together as a team. That's a 162 game season, and it's a grind.
Right.
But those young players really did a great job this year. We were real proud of them in Baltimore. It is a special thing to find the right people, and I'm not saying that they're not the right people, but they weren't necessarily the ones that you would have chosen, given the opportunity to have, a wider audience of
So
candidates.
going back to I know you want to say something before I forget it.
Yeah.
Sounds like what you're saying is, yes, it might be easier to retain someone that's there, but changing someone's mindset is a lot harder
Oh my goodness.
than starting from
Yes.
scratch. And I think that's what happens. Most dentists, when they're looking at purchasing versus startup, they're thinking that it's tougher to go through the startup process, as in find someone, right? Find a place, advertise for patients, right? But they're not looking at, if I have someone, I have to change her mindset or his mindset. If I have a patient, I have to show him how my dentistry is different from the one he was coming to. Because in my mind, having done this or own businesses, it's harder for that. It's harder to send someone. It's like almost rebending a metal that's bent, right? You can't rebend it. It's already bent, right? So to me, that's more harder than finding someone and, like you said, growing together, like the Baltimore Orioles. They came together and had a good season. But that's how I look at it. I didn't know what you were going to say.
I was gonna lean on your years of experience. So in terms of, and you dated yourself when you said 82. So I'm not dating you. You said that. Since 1982, you've probably seen a ton of dentists make the decision between acquisition and new build. In your experience, all these years, as someone that's been on the equipment side, the cabinetry side, the build-out side, would you say you've seen greater success for the acquisition, just based on your best knowledge, greater success for the acquisition doctors or the startup doctors, and success being defined as you've seen significant growth for them?
Well, I always took a very active role in trying to help with the future planning, the business plan, the growth of the
I know, and you've been a big part of a lot of practices. That's why I'm leaning on you for that information.
So it's, I am very proud of the startups and how well they've done over the years. But again, I'm going to have to say that the startups who went ahead and acquired a practice and merged it in just had that hyper growth. It's like the stock that you own at 18, in short order shot up to 36. Nobody doesn't like that. Maybe that's the dirty little secret that no dentists don't want to talk about it when they do that. Is that what they were able to, don't tell anybody. This was awesome. Yeah. So but as far as the purchases are concerned, yes, there are very, very many successful purchases too. I don't want to leave that out.
50-50. I'm getting 50-50.
But here, to answer your question, from where I'm sitting is growth. You'll always have more growth on a startup because it's a startup. You're starting from zero, right?
That's a
and wherever you go, you're measuring that growth and saying, well, look at this growth. It's 100%, it's 200%, it's 300%, right? Whereas in a purchase, you may be purchasing a practice that has zero room to grow, right? So then you have to think creative. How am I going to grow this? Am I going to go to a different place, how do I increase my patient? Am I going to buy another practice and merge it in, like Brian said here? So it still becomes a different model in business.
First of all, I'm glad you said that. Awesome. Because what the listeners probably thinking too in terms of growth. Let me not beat around the bush. I said growth to try to be political and polite. Profitable. That's what our listeners I want to know out there. In your experience, forget about growth. Let's say they didn't grow at all. They just took over a practice. In your experience over these years, who do you think was more profitable?
Well, you got to buy the practice, and then you pay that practice off. By the time you pay that practice
When you
off,
build the practice, you got to pay that. Yeah.
You got to pay that practice off, and when you pay that practice off, you're going to have a new expense, and the new expense is going to be moving or doing something very significant to the existing space, expanding. So the point is there's no getting around the fact that if you're going to have a healthy business, you're not standing still. You're always moving forward or you're going backwards. And when you buy a practice, you do put yourself closer to possibly finding some inertia. When you're starting anew and everything's new, when you flip the lights on that beautiful new office that you have, there's something inside of you that says, I'm going to make this work. And if you're true to your business plan and you have one, that practice around the corner may come available. You've got those last 4 operatories to fill, and things really can come together nicely. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case for everybody, that they're going to find that practice, but there's enough room for both parties to do well. And I'd like to see more merge-ins because it's great for existing practices who have the capacity and who had the vision to make their original facility strong enough to be able to handle the organic growth and that which may come from the acquisition of a practice that leaves the fixed overhead behind. So much more profitable way to buy a practice too.
So is it your position, if I'm a dentist, 5 years out of school, I come to you and I say, look, I'm thinking about owning my own practice. I'm thinking about purchasing an existing one. Are you gonna convince me to start one up, or will you direct me to find one to buy?
It's not a matter of convincing somebody as much as it is asking the right questions to find out what their tolerance for risk is. And sometimes the tolerance for risk, and I'm not in a position to judge someone's clinical capabilities of how much dentistry they can produce. I am going to try and get them to answer that question for themselves so that we can get a better grip on what their future capabilities are, and through a whole series of questions to be able to really size this person up. Again, I'll use a baseball analogy of the 5-tool player. Is this somebody who just has the personality, the business sense, and given some of the indications of their clinical capabilities and what they like to do, and they have a tolerance for being able to be successful. They have a business plan. Those are people who probably should really look closer at what's going to have the larger growth opportunity for them. And I would be more inclined to recommend a startup for somebody like that, and also keep their eyes open for.
But how do you measure tolerance for risk? Because help me understand this, right?
Okay.
I think the general analysis is it's less risky to purchase a practice. Is that what you're saying?
No, but I think a lot of people think that way.
Okay, that's what I was about to say. For me, that's what a lot of people think. I don't think I don't know which one is more risky. I know that both have the risk. If you're starting up a practice, it has its own risks.
Yes.
And if you're purchasing the practice, it has its own risk.
I think
How do you measure which one is riskier?
I think it's case by case, right?
Well,
because if you're buying anything in general, right?
Yeah.
If you're buying any business, any car, anything you're buying, right? If it's something good you're buying, you're paying a premium for it as well, right? So if I'm going out there and buying a business that's operating and it's making good profit, it's doing all that stuff, right? I'm paying a premium for it. The guy who built the business got it to a place and he wants to sell it at a good price, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now I need to have more money to come out of the pocket, right? It's still risky because if I take over, that doesn't mean that business keeps on working as hard or as profitable or better, right? I still have to have confidence in myself. I have to know what I'm doing to maintain that business, right? Versus if you're doing a startup, well, it's easier to assess that risk because what if it doesn't work? This one that I'm buying knows it's working. Yeah, but you still have to take over and make it work.
And you also
Otherwise, you're losing money, right?
and you don't know what condition equipment is. With how many doctors have we talked to that barely looked at the equipment or told us that just
well, that's part of the risk. That's
well,
what I'm
it
saying.
works. Well, you can buy a used car with 180,000 miles on it. Doesn't mean it's going to break tomorrow. But
It is part of the risk because if you're buying a practice and you go into the practice to start operating, the equipment can break down.
Yeah.
And now, bad luck, but it's part of the risk. But it's people don't. I don't think you're right. I don't think they evaluate risk in that aspect.
Well, it's funny. As long as I've been in dentistry, this is a funny way of saying success, but dentists have been the second least likely of all small businesses in all categories to fail, behind funeral directors.
Really?
Explain that.
That's it. Yeah.
Explain that.
I don't want to laugh at that.
But that being said, people talk about risk. It's a funny way to say success, but dentists are able to pay their bills. They're starting at a certain level of expectation that has been well earned by their colleagues ahead of them who have done a good job of running practices. But this is all I've ever done, and I got to tell you, dentists deserve more. They deserve the best because they hold that precious dental degree that they work so hard to acquire. They don't want to leave opportunity, they don't want to leave success, they don't want to leave profitability on the table. So rather than taking what may be considered an easier, safer route to buy something to help maintain and just maintain that at best, given the limitations of the physical plant, having a good business plan and taking advantage of the opportunities that exist today and getting the right size practice and getting the right advice from a design and build and equipping and practice management standpoint is something that may very well help them to achieve their goals more easily than they might have. Because risk cuts both ways. It's risk of not realizing your full potential or risk of failure. And as I said, these numbers have existed for a long time.
Yeah.
Dentists make it.
Yeah, I mean, generally people look at picking something off where you left off is easier than me starting, right? That's common perception, I think.
Yeah, they're
in
thinking
humans.
They're thinking the insurances are in place and all that. But think about it. Do you want to take over something that, if you start the insurances, let's say you start a business and you're doing the insurances and HR books from the get-go, you know them, like you've set them up. When you're taking them over, you're just hoping to understand what someone else has created. So
Well, the insurances, you mentioned that, Sasha, and it's good that you did. Briefly, I want to mention that there are companies today that are in line to be able to help dentists to achieve the best reimbursement on their insurance, particularly on their PPOs. Now, odds are that the previous dentist may not have been achieving that level, that you might, as a fresh dentist, negotiating those agreements properly. So that alone can leave tens of thousands of dollars on the table that nobody's going to talk about from a broker standpoint because it's not part of the deal. Right. But it's a big part of the profitability as what percentage of production is touched by insurance in some fashion, whether it's copay or whether it's the actual insurance payments. So that's another key thing that's available at dentists.
yeah,
You've heard it from Brian. If you're ready to open or purchase, he's gonna recommend you to start up first. Get it under your belt, and then go out there and purchase a practice and merge with your startup so that you can have a boost in patients and growth. This way, you're organically growing.
merging is a unique thing. Don't hesitate to email us. The info@armincoinc.com if you guys have any more questions about merging. We could probably do another 30-minute segment just on merging.
Sure.
So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Your knowledge is always appreciated. Look forward to having you on future shows. This has been Synergy Practices Podcast powered by Arminco. We're talking acquisitions versus startups. Check us out on Spotify, Google, Apple, anywhere you guys listen to podcasts at this point. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great job, Brian. Brian, you should be a politician. You don't answer Art's questions, but you do.
I was about to say that. I was about to say he's not going to answer my
The
question.
beauty of it is,
But I mean,
we're not. I don't want to piss off the brokers.
you're not
Okay.
pissing them off.
But because I want to be Switzerland to this thing. You can do both. It's like they don't think of that.
Right.
But if they do a successful job, they let us help them. On
So
the
it's
front
funny
end.
you said that. You know the Dr. Ritter, I was here.
Uh-huh.
He purchased the practice,
Uh-huh.
and then 10 years later purchased another one and merged it.
Merged it, but did you do
Merged
it into a
it,
larger
right.
facility?
So no, that's the thing. He didn't do it.
Consolidated.
That's what I'm saying. If you're already, this is what I don't understand. If you're already a 4-operatory practice, right?
Yeah.
And you buy it and you stay a 4-operatory practice.
Right.
I mean, unless if you have room to buy another patient, that means the practice you purchased was not doing as much as they should have.
Right.
Right.
Right. And
So-
but you bought it for less, presumably.
That's
too.
correct.
Yeah.
So and that's the part that to me, would break down. Keeping it where it is.
Nailed it.
You know? I gotta do one advertisement version, so if you wanna like stop and then give me
Oh,
10
let me
minutes.
stop this because it's easy for me to edit.